You see it on the news all the time, right? Earthquakes, hurricanes, floods. It all feels so random, like some kind of terrible lottery. But what if it's not? What if there's a hidden formula that explains why a natural event turns into a full-blown human catastrophe? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at that exact formula. And this is the central mystery, isn't it? It's a paradox we see over and over. You have two similar events, but two completely wildly different outcomes. It's clearly not just about the size of the wave or how hard the ground shakes. So what's the secret ingredient? What turns a powerful act of nature into a disaster? The answer is actually surprisingly simple, and it has almost everything to do with us. So, the best way to think about this whole thing is to imagine a disaster as a recipe. Seriously. It's not a single thing that just happens. No, it's the result of mixing very specific ingredients together under just the right, or in this case, the very wrong, conditions. That's the first crucial point you have to get. An earthquake, a hurricane, a wildfire, by itself, that's just a natural process. It's an event, a hazard. It only, and I mean only, becomes a disaster when it collides with people and all the stuff we've built. And it's that combination of ingredients that decides everything. Get the mix wrong and you've got a catastrophe on your hands. But get it right and you can actually weather the storm. So what are these all-important ingredients? What we're really talking about here is a concept called disaster risk. And the key word is potential. It's the potential for harm. It's not a guarantee. It's a calculated possibility based on these key factors that, we can actually measure. And this is the important part, we can change. Okay, so the recipe has three main ingredients. First, you need a hazard. That's the event itself, like the earthquake. Second, you need exposure. That means people and property have to be in the path of that hazard. And third, maybe the most critical ingredient of all, vulnerability. So here it is, the whole formula. Disaster risk equals hazard times exposure times vulnerability. And that multiplication is everything. It's not addition. If any one of these ingredients is zero, the risk plummets to zero. Think about it. A massive hurricane in the middle of the ocean where nobody is. Zero risk. This is the key insight. We can't stop the hazard, but we have incredible power over the other two parts of the equation. All right, let's break down that first ingredient a little more. What exactly are we talking about when we say hazards? A hazard is simply the source of that potential harm. It's the physical event. But you have to remember, a hazard on its own is not a disaster. A volcano erupting on a totally uninhabited island? That's a spectacular geological event, for sure. But it's not a catastrophe. It's just the starting point of our formula. And the definition of a hazard is probably way broader than you think. It's not just natural events. The World Health Organization classifies them in other groups too. You've got biological hazards, like pandemics. You've got technological ones, like a bridge collapse or an industrial accident. And even societal hazards, like conflict. This framework helps us see that risk can come in a lot of different forms. Okay, so we've got our hazard. Now we get to the parts of the equation where we, as humans, play the starring role. Exposure and vulnerability. People mix these two up all the time, but the difference between them, well, it's the key to understanding this whole thing. Exposure is really simple. Are you, your home, your city, in the path of danger? If you live on a coastline, you're exposed to hurricanes. Simple. But vulnerability, that's way more complex. It's all the underlying conditions, social, economic, physical, that make it harder for you to prepare for, survive, and recover from that hurricane. So who are we talking about when we say vulnerable? Well, it's people living in poverty who might not be able to afford a stronger home. It's older adults or people with chronic illnesses who can't just pick up and evacuate. It could be migrants who face language barriers when emergency warnings go out. Vulnerability is a deeply human condition, and it's shaped by our circumstances in life. So this isn't just a bunch of theory. Let's look at a powerful and honestly tragic real-world example of this exact formula in action. The 2015 earthquake in Nepal. This quote gets right to the heart of it. A powerful earthquake struck. That was the hazard. Thousands and thousands of people were in its path. That was the exposure. But the absolutely devastating death toll, that came down to one critical vulnerability. Over 8,800 people lost their lives. Just let that number sink in for a second. It's staggering. But the real question is, why? Why was it so high? The answer wasn't in the shaking of the ground. It was in the buildings people were living in. The data here tells the entire story. Just look at the difference. Over 474,000 low-strength masonry buildings, we're talking stone or brick held together with mud mortar, were completely destroyed. Now compare that to just over 6,600 reinforced concrete buildings. The numbers are just jaw-dropping. So, here's the bottom line. It was the same hazard, shaking the same ground, with the same level of exposure. But the outcomes were wildly different, all based on one single vulnerability, the type of building people were in. The earthquake didn't kill people. The collapsing buildings did. This is the disaster risk formula playing out in the most tragic way imaginable. Now, understanding this formula is so powerful because it gives us a roadmap. If we can identify vulnerability, we can do something about it. So how does this theory actually translate into real-world solutions? And I want to be really clear about this. This formula is not just some academic exercise. It is a practical, hands-on toolkit used by emergency managers, city planners, and governments all over the world to map out their risks and ultimately to save lives. For instance, what you're seeing here is the Emergency Management Portal for British Columbia in Canada. They use a process called a Hazard, Risk, and Vulnerability Analysis, or HRVA. It's exactly what it sounds like. They systematically go through every potential hazard, figure out who and what is exposed, and then pinpoint their specific vulnerabilities. And that's the whole point. By understanding where the weak points are, whether it's old building codes, not enough evacuation routes, or maybe a part of the population that doesn't get emergency warnings, communities can make targeted fixes to strengthen those areas long before the ground ever starts to shake or the water starts to rise. So let's come back to our core formula one last time. A disaster isn't fate. It isn't random. It's a product of factors. And while we often can't do a thing about the hazard itself, we have enormous influence over our exposure and, most critically, our own vulnerability. Which brings us to a final thought. This framework isn't just for governments and experts. It's a way for all of us to see the world. Understanding risk is the absolute first step to reducing it. So the question I'll leave you with is this. What are the hidden vulnerabilities right where you live? And what could be done to fix them?